Welcome to The Living Planet, the podcast where we explore the wonders of nature, from the tallest trees to the tiniest creatures that keep our world thriving. Whether it's the forest, the oceans, or the creatures in between, we uncover the beauty, challenges, and secrets of the world around us. And today, we're focusing on some of the nature's hardest workers, bees. From their incredible role in pollination to the threats they face, we'll explore why these tiny pollinators are so important and how to protect them. We're also thrilled to be joined by John Leahy, the beekeeper of our area here in Dungarvan, Ireland. He'll be sharing his experience on the fascinating world of beekeeping. So, let's swing it!
So hello, my name is John Leahy. I've always had a passion for native species, and bees definitely come under that remit. I'm taking part in the bumblebee monitoring scheme for the National Biodiversity Centre, covering a small area in Dungarvan again for 2025. In case you don't know about it, it's a simple scheme that contributes towards the monitoring of bumblebees in particular. They have other schemes for pollinators, but I'll be doing the bumblebee again this year. So you have an area of 1 to 1.5 miles long, and then you walk that and you survey the area 5 meters either side of you, to your right and left, and in front and behind, and you break it down into grids and see how many bumblebees are within that area and identify the species. This is to be carried out each month, one day each month from March until October, which would be the season for the bumblebees. It's best to be carried out between 11:30 and 3:30 in the daytime, preferably on a sunny day. I know it's not always manageable early and late in the year, but the data that is received is still important to see the numbers that are out that time of the year as well. Bumblebees can actually fly in the rain. Because of their size, it doesn't affect them as much, but they do have problems with their temperature, so that's why between 11:30 and 3:30 is important, because it's the warmer part of the day and it allows them to fly more. So the following information as well is going to be more so concerning bees within this country as opposed to Europe or the world. The story is generally that bees and pollinators are in decline, but most of the information will just regard bees within Ireland.
And now we will ask the questions.
How important are bees for our environment and food production?
So bees are incredibly important. So to give you an idea, there are 100 bee species in Ireland. Obviously everyone knows the honeybee, but on top of that there are 21 species of bumblebee, 15 of which are classed as true bumblebee and 6 which are cuckoo bumblebees. There are also then 78 species of solitary bee, which people don't realise they look very similar, or a lot of them would look very similar to honeybees, but they are, as the name would indicate, solitary bees, and so they would still pollinate plants, but not as part of a hive. So in case you wondered about the bumblebee kind of situation, so true bumblebees do have hives. They're much smaller than honeybee hives, so you'd be looking at around 50 to maybe 400 individuals, whereas to give you an indication, a honeybee hive would be between 20 to 80,000 individuals. They'd often be in like stone walls and like tunnels underground. That would be the bumblebee kind of idea of where they kind of nest, like I say, much smaller. They can sting as well, which people don't realise. The workers can't, but the queen can, and it doesn't kill the queen to sting either. So honeybees die when they sting. It removes the sting from the abdomen of the body. Everyone knows, or most people, if you've been stung by a wasp, it can sting multiple times, whereas bees unfortunately do die. So it is a last resort, a bee to sting. So most of the time they're just out looking for pollen, which they can turn into nectar. So bumblebees don't produce honey, they just produce nectar for the workers, for the queen, for the young to feed. They kind of create a waxy coating that the young eat, whereas honeybees obviously produce honey that then is harvested by humans. So the cuckoo part of the bumblebee is they don't have hives. They invade the hive of the true bumblebee, as the cuckoo bird lays its eggs in the nest of a bird when it's not there, and removes the eggs. The cuckoo bumblebee invades the hive, kills the queen, and then the workers raise the young of the cuckoo bumblebee. So that's how it works. People don't often know, but it's fascinating. There's lots of different interesting facts about bees. So bees are the most important pollinators of crops and native plant species in Ireland. They are a key component of our wildlife and one of the busiest, least appreciated workforces that we have. A study from the Department of the Environment found that bees are worth €53 million a year to the economy. It's just staggering to think that is this tiny little thing flying around, how important it actually is for us all. It's also important to note that there are other insects that are pivotal for pollination, such as moths, wasps, beetles, hoverflies and butterflies as well. So they all help with pollination, but bees would be primary pollinators. So in Ireland, crops such as apples, strawberries, raspberries, tomatoes, blackcurrants, peppers, courgettes, even pumpkins, they're all reliant on bees for pollination. So you wouldn't have, I don't know an exact figure, but you would very much have a depleted crop, if a crop at all, if bees weren't there to pollinate it. So it is estimated that almost 3/4 of our wild plants rely on insects, so obviously bees, for pollination, and then bees are the most important of those pollinators.
What are the biggest threats to bees today? How can we protect them from it?
So bees, like I said, are all over the world, are in decline. So any small parts we can do are vital. So more than half of Ireland's bee species have undergone substantial declines in their numbers since the 1980s. I can actually remember when I was young, coming over on holiday here, that at night time, particularly with moths and insects, more so nocturnal ones, because I remember seeing them in the headlights, and they would be like bouncing off the car as you were driving along country lanes. Now I drive along country lanes at night time coming back from work and hardly see any, which is scary to think that I've seen the change myself in such a short period of time. But the distribution of 42 species has declined more than 50% since 1980, which is a staggering number. In fact, there's actually been 2 species of bees that have become extinct in Ireland. They're still across in England, but within the last 80 years there's been 2 recorded. So they both have, well, all bees have scientific names, the solitary ones, but there's one that's called the Angelina and the Nomada Shebela. There was another species as well that was thought to be extinct, but the numbers are so low, but it was actually rediscovered in 2012, the Angelina for the left. So that's positive, but then at the same time, with numbers being so low, it's very hard to bolster their numbers back up. They're not a species that you could breed particularly easily for reintroduction. They're very much sort of a self-sustaining species once they get to a number. The bumblebee also suffers with decline. So the great yellow bumblebee is actually on the verge of extinction in Ireland. There are 4 bumblebee species endangered and 2 vulnerable. So out of the 21 species that we have in this country, 7 are very much at risk. Many of the mining bees have also suffered. So mining bees would be solitary bees. They would be suffering from the removal of the native woodlands and the loss of species-rich grasslands, heathlands and coastal dunes. It just reduces the abundance of native wildflowers and the number of available nesting sites, which mining bees do depend upon. So as I said earlier, that bumblebees would often use cracks in stone walls, and they would dig. The queen often digs. So this time of year, if you see any of the big bumblebees around, they'd often be the queens. So they will be looking for a nesting site. They'll be feeding to keep their strength up. They'll be looking for a nesting site, and then once she finds that, she'll often kind of dig down, push her way under the ground or into a crevice, and then she'll start the kind of her colony, the hive. But mining bees do sort of, I suppose that the name kind of goes with them. They will often dig in themselves as well, but from land being turned into human beneficial places, it very much impacts on them.
How does climate change affect bees and their habitats? Have you noticed any changes in recent years?
I suppose I was saying there a minute ago, the change I suppose I did notice was the decline in insects just in general, particularly nighttime. Daytime as well, I'd be out a lot during the day. I think you still see lots, and maybe that's the misconception that you see them everywhere, insects and bees on things like if there's lavender around or heather, and you just presume that there's heaps and heaps. But I think that is the dangerous slippery slope, that because you see them, you think they're everywhere, whereas in fact, if you start looking into it, or you do any of the pollinator schemes, you see that the numbers actually are significantly low, and if the numbers drop too low, it's very, very hard to pick them back up. The decline itself in numbers, there's not actually one single cause. So threats include land use change for agriculture or urbanisation. This results in just the loss and degradation of natural habitats. Intensive agriculture, it leads to a change in the landscape, like I said, for any kind of burrowing or tunnelling of insects, but primarily from the pollinator perspective. And then the disappearance of diverse flora, so that obviously then reduces food, because we see bees as pollinating plants, but they obviously need it themselves to sustain the hive and to rear young, to continue for the whole season. So their season would be, even now, like I say, bumblebees would be March to sort of September, end of September, maybe early October, depending. But honeybees you'll see now out in my own garden. I was seeing there only yesterday, there was a good few honeybees on the heather. So getting rid of areas that would be natural sort of wildflower areas is going to definitely impact them. There's no way it wouldn't. And then also from changing the area, you'll get different plants growing, which might not necessarily be beneficial to them. Certain plants flower earlier in the year and some flower later in the year. If you don't allow the ones to flower later in the year because you've taken away the ground or changed the composition of it, then the bees starve. So that definitely would be an issue. Pesticides and other pollutants can also affect pollinators. So they're a big one that's obviously over the years. I think there was a big pesticide company that they used to use there in the 80s, DDT I think it was, and they have banned that since, but it indiscriminately killed any insect. So that was a very bad one. Insecticides and fungicides and herbicides. Herbicide is more so indirectly, but it has been proven to negatively impact bees. It can make them confused and then they can't find their way back to the hive. So Parliament actually in Europe highlighted the need to reduce the use of pesticides. So during a vote in recently, it was in 2021, they came up with the biodiversity strategy for 2030. So it was going to be for a 9-year plan. They called for an urgent revision of there's actually an EU pollinators initiative that we fall under as well. So they agreed with the target to reduce the use of more hazardous chemicals and pesticides by 50% by 2030. I think things need to be done a little bit quicker, but at least there's a target. So hopefully things might move slightly faster in that direction. But as well as that, which maybe might not be seen, there's other dangers to bees and honeybees would be such as invasive species. It kind of links in, and I'll say soon a little bit about climate change, but climate change is obviously warming up the area, and there's all sorts of negative effects happening because of it, but it is allowing species that wouldn't have been found in this country before to now be found here. So the yellow-legged hornet would be one. So that is very negatively affecting in honeybees. And then from that you would get parasites that would not have been found here. So the native bees wouldn't be able to deal with the burden, and it would very, very much cause problems for them. So the rise in temperature, extreme weather events, obviously it affects everyone, it affects ourselves. The one that I think is more noticeable recently is the changing of the seasons. So, for example, over the last few years, like lambs being born in December, daffodils being seen in December. Even now, there's birds nesting outside. You can hear chicks. So eggs are hatching, and we're only coming up to the end of March. So it's very, very early. The issue you get with the earlier it becomes, animals aren't always adapted for them. The sudden frosty mornings, the odd one maybe isn't a problem, but if you then say got a cold snap of a week of frosty mornings, that's when it would kill off the first sort of generation coming through after the winter. So bumblebees would come out of hibernation. It's only the queen that survives, all the workers die. If she were to come out and then you were to get a cold snap, it could potentially kill her, and that's then that whole line of bumblebees gone completely. Birds, again, slightly coming away from the topic, but birds would be the one where they might lose a whole clutch, and then they would reclutch later in the season, but you might have potentially lost that first clutch, which if it had been a month or 6 weeks later, they could still have had 2 clutches. So yeah, it's very unusual. It's very much pushing things in a negative way, and it very much impacts them, and you can see that it's doing that.
If someone wanted to support bees but can't keep their own hive, what simple actions can they take in their daily lives?
It's a great question. and there is definitely a few simple things you can do. So the first one is No Mow May. So it's an annual campaign. It originated in the UK, but it's now very much established in Ireland. So it's asking everyone to put away the lawnmower during the month of May to help with native wildlife. So it incorporates all the pollinators and other insects and birds and everything. It's just a great initiative. So native Irish wildflowers like dandelions, clover, they provide the best source of pollen and nectar for hungry wild pollinators. So that would go back to, if you allowed the native plants to grow, you would have the ones early in the season, middle of the season, late in the season to help all the insects out. So by mowing less, we give them a chance to appear. So you don't need any seeds. The only thing I would say is that every year you do it, you'll get better results. So the first year you do it, you might find you don't get too much growth other than grass, but that's just because we've got into the routine of constantly cutting our grass. So the grass tends to be the dominant force there. So I suppose the other thing is that you should also pick grass clippings up. They actually create the ground to be too fertile because it rots back into the ground and then just creates a cycle of the grass growing again. Whereas if you rake it and get rid of that, the ground, it kind of sounds counterproductive, but the ground doesn't become as fertile, and that way it allows native plants to grow or compete at least with the grass. If the grass is too fertile, it's basically too strong, and that's all that grows, and it dominates. But you don't have to stop at No Mow May. So mowing less all summer is really one of the best things you can do for pollinators. So there's also Let It Bloom June and Help Them Fly July. So there's a few months, and I know the little catchy kind of sayings, but it does really work, and it's very important. Excuse me. So you think, why should we do this? So in Ireland, 1/3 of our wild bees are threatened with extinction. So as I said earlier, it's mainly to do with hunger. So there isn't enough food to support them in our landscape. So there's so much urbanisation and expansion from cities and even large towns. So if we all choose to put our lawnmowers away just for 1 month, even if you just do the 1 month, it could start creating a network of places where pollinators can survive and thrive. So it's often because there'll be one small pocket, and it may be hard to get there, and there's predators around that would eat bees, or the hive might be in a location, and then the plants start to dry up or die away. So they need locations. So a bumblebee can fly 5 kilometers in kind of one bout, but they don't really want to do that because it uses an extreme amount of resources and demand on their body. So closer is better for them. So it's actually even better if you could leave it from April to September. That would be kind of the real sort of season for the insects and pollinators, and then basically the native wildflowers will start to grow. Like I say, it won't happen straight away. It is a little bit of a drawn out, or not drawn out, sounds negative, but a long road. It's not going to be 1 year. And then you can also get long flowering meadows. So if you did have an area in your garden that you could put aside, I understand not everyone has gardens, but if there was a small area, or if you came from a farm or knew somebody with a farm, there could be an area that would be left or around hedgerow ways. So you could just cut once a year. So in September, after the seeds have dropped, and again, this massively promotes native sort of meadows to be produced as well, which is vital for things. So leaving long undisturbed grass is also good. That's good for mammals as well, for mice and for birds. I know, again, not quite the bee side of things, but they're very good. They also provide areas for solitary bees or bumblebees to then try and find nesting areas for going into winter in undisturbed locations. But there is other options as well. If there's any hedges round, or you know anyone with hedges, a natural A-shaped profile rather than a neat box shape is good for pollinators. Flowers grow on old wood, so try not to cut them annually. Try and maybe work every 2 or 3 years to cut, and it just a slightly bit more of a natural shape, and you'll get different levels of flowers growing. But yeah, the main thing, if you don't have like a garden or a sort of a lawn area, there's lots of, there's a few other ways. There's planting in pots, window boxes, peat-free compost. You could even get the bags like in Lidl. You can just cut like a line in the top of that and just plant straight into the bag itself. Plants like thyme, chives, oregano, lavender. Lavender's a fantastic one. You'd often see in places, and Lidl do plants, and Aldi, that would have the bee-friendly symbol on, and then they're ones that grow quite well and grow well in this country and would produce a lot of pollen, which is then goes to nectar and goes to honey, so it's very good for them. So so around hedgerows and things like that, wild areas, dry stone walls, basically anything that we can leave undisturbed, so there's no need to go mad messing with kind of areas that you might think look messy, but that's just from our aesthetic opinion. Just because we think it looks messy, it's actually ideal for nature, it's ideal for wildlife. They want undisturbed areas. It's very good for them. It looks, like I say, ugly because we've got this perception that that's what it should be, but it's not necessarily always the right way to be.
And my last question for you today is, what message would you like to share with young people about the importance of bees and environmental conservation?
So, I'm going to repeat myself a little bit now, I'm afraid, because all the points I've made have been key to improve the chances of success for the survival of pollinators, and I suppose ultimately our own survival. So native meadows are disappearing all across Ireland. These important habitats are full of flowers that have evolved alongside our pollinators, offering the best source of pollen and nectar. So no mow May, if you do have a garden, is a great way to begin. It's so simple, but so effective to restore this habitat, creating small pockets of native meadows in our gardens and communities. It can bring people together. If we just get past the fact that it looks a little bit unkept and unruly, it's so important. So mowing less allows local native wildflowers to emerge naturally over the course of the season. Even though May is like 1 month, you would get a variety from the 1st right up until the 1st of June. So it's unusual to hear, and I know sometimes councils do it, and it looks good, but the wildflower seed mixes and the seed balls that you can buy can be really colourful and look really pretty, but a lot of the time they're non-native flowers, so they very little benefit to native pollinators. So they will go to them, but a lot of the time it's because the colour attracts them, because they haven't evolved or adapted to service those plants, I suppose, essentially. they don't really create an awful lot of benefit for them, certainly not to the degree that, like, even simply like dandelion or clover would. So dandelion tend to be one of the first out, that's why they're really important. So dandelions are out at the moment because they're really rich for bees. Clover tend to be a little bit later in the season. But yeah, the wildflower mix are good, but if they're not ideal, to be honest. If you could get the native wildflower ones, they would be much better, but a simpler and a much cheaper is simply just not to mow. Another big one would be don't use insecticides, fungicides or herbicides if possible at all. You can even ask when you're buying plants in garden centres if they've used any herbicides, because even a plant that you bring home that might look fine could have been sprayed, and it does have negative effects. It doesn't always kill the pollinators, the herbicides particularly, but like I say, it creates a drowsiness and kind of a certain amount of confusion, and then that would often lead to them being predated, because birds do have a taste for bees, unfortunately. I suppose lastly it will be, but a big one which I didn't really realise myself until a few years ago, is that most honeybees are essentially domesticated pollinators, living in hives and managed by beekeepers. So there's, as I said, over 100 wild bee species, which all of them are under threat of varying levels. But if we have too many honeybee hives in the landscape, it's not a massive country that we live in. They can't all compete for food, and that would be a real issue. From doing this bumblebee study that I've been partaking in, they are struggling with the honeybee just because of the sheer volume. So as I said, honeybee nests or hives, would be much larger. But if you have a greater quantity of nests than naturally you would have, because people are keeping hives, they're just not going to be able to get to the plants. All the plants will have been stripped before the native bees can get there, and you need them as well. So the idea might be, well, if the honeybees are pollinating, then it's not a problem, but you need diversity, because some bees would be adapted to particular flowers. If they're starving because they can't get to them flowers, then them plants may be affected negatively, and then they run the risk of becoming extinct, which we don't always associate plants with extinction, but it very much happens as well. And through evolution, there's very much adaptations from particular animals towards particular flora, and insects are very much within them categories. We have to realise that as well. They might not be able to get to the end of the season when this particular plant emerges if all the food's been taken from the plants by the honeybees. So you should really only get a honeybee hive if you want to start a new hobby, but it's not great for biodiversity. I'm going to be honest, I know some people don't particularly want to hear that, but you really have to consider maybe you could set up more wildflowers, an area that is left slightly unkept. You can do like a stone wall, or you could look into different techniques and different insects. We need to remember we can all make a change. Even a single person can contribute towards a progressive and positive future. So every generation needs to strive to improve what we leave for the next generation. That's really what we need to think. So don't think how can I help, but try and think, what can I do to help? That's kind of the main thing going forward, because we can all do something. There is this misconception again that one person can't make a change, but if everyone thought that, then change would never happen. So even a single action can create a ripple effect, and people see that it's not that difficult. Sometimes there's this idea that, oh, it's very difficult so I can't do it, but people seeing actions being taken can create positive change, and they realise that it's achievable for themselves. So that's what I'd say, that we all need to realise that our actions have an impact upon everything. So we need to adjust our actions for positive.
Thanks for listening to The Living Planet. We hope you enjoyed this podcast. It was all possible because of Angelina, Shebela, audio music, John Leahy asking the questions, and a lot of people who were involved in research and setup. And, of course, a huge thank to our guest, John Leahy, for sharing his knowledge and experience in beekeeping.